Ah, yes. Detroit, Michigan. Once America's richest city. Just 280 miles away from Chicago, it boasted high skyscrapers, the Detroit River, and tons of industries. It also hosted Michigan Central Station, which hosted many iconic railroads like the New York Central, the Baltimore and Ohio, and the Canadian Pacific Railway. But ever since Amtrak's takeover in 1971, it was only seeing a few trains in and out of Chicago, while some headed to farther away destinations, but one route in particular stands out for having the longest route from Detroit at the time, as it went all the way to New York City. But to do that, it had to cross the Canadian border twice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Amtrak's Niagara Rainbow. The New York Central once held the title to this route and called it the Empire State Express, and it was one of their premier trains, stretching from NYC to Cleveland via Ontario. It was said to be one of their fastest trains, covering the 435-mile portion between New York and Buffalo in just 7 hours. When the Empire State Express was extended to Cleveland sometime in the 1890s, it became the first passenger train with a scheduled speed of over 52 miles per hour, and the first to make runs of 143 miles between New York City and Albany, the longest scheduled non-stop run until then. The service was discontinued for a few years in 1967 until Amtrak's takeover in 71. They still kept the name of the Empire State Express for a couple years before dubbing it the Niagara Rainbow in 1976. The Empire State Express, as it was then known, made its first run to Detroit on October 31st, 1974. Before that, it was one of the trains on the Empire Corridor, making a daily run between New York's Grand Central Station and Buffalo, New York. The states of New York and Michigan provided the funds to extend the train through to Detroit. The Empire State Express carried no sleeping accommodations, but it did run with a baggage car and a diner. At Buffalo, passengers could connect with the Penn Central train to Toronto. Amtrak changed the name of the train to the Niagara Rainbow on April 25, 1976, although Niagara Falls itself continued to be served by a bus connection. In 1978, several state governments proposed replacing the Niagara Rainbow and its Chicago to Cleveland to New York counterpart, the Lakeshore Limited, with a single train. The proposed service would have separate sections via Detroit and Cleveland west of Buffalo, plus separate Boston and New York sections east of Albany. That plan was not implemented and the two trains remained separate. In October of 1978, the Niagara Rainbow finally began stopping in Niagara Falls. Unlike the modern Maple Leaf, which uses the Whirlpool Rapids Ridge to get into Canada, the Niagara Rainbow used the old Michigan Central Railway Bridge. From Canada, the route traveled north and southwest using trackage from Canada Southern Railway, with the stops at St. Thomas, Ontario, Windsor, Ontario, before crossing the border again into Detroit. Now, as I said earlier, the Niagara Rainbow crossed the Canadian border twice just to get into Detroit, and between NYC and Detroit lay 16 stops, 18 with terminals included, which are New York's Grand Central Station, Croton-Harmon, Poughkeepsie, Rhinecliff, Hudson, Albany, Schenectady, Amsterdam, Utica, Rome, Syracuse, Buffalo, Buffalo Exchange Street, Niagara Falls, Fort Erie, St. Thomas, Windsor, and Detroit, coming in at a total route length of 676 miles covered in just under 15 hours. Amtrak truncated the Niagara Rainbow to Niagara Falls on January 31st, 1979, after Michigan and New York withdrew their support. The United States Secretary of Transportation, Brock Adams, proposed rerouting the Lakeshore Limited, which ran through Cleveland on the opposite side of Lake Erie, over the Ontario route, but this plan was not adopted by the Congress. Despite its popularity among the passengers, the Niagara Rainbow was unfortunately discontinued in 1981 due to budget cuts and low ridership. But that's not where all things close here. Not quite yet. Amtrak also ran an overnight service between New York and Toronto, also named the Niagara Rainbow, from June 1994 to September 10, 1995. It operated as a once-weekly additional frequency of the Maple Leaf, departing New York City on Friday night and returning on Monday morning. In March of 2019, Amtrak indicated the interest in quote-unquote restoration of a Detroit to Toronto service in its fiscal year of 2020 funding request. We don't know if this is actually happening though, unfortunately. The Niagara Rainbow was truly an interesting train. It crossed the Canadian border twice just to get back into the States, and it got its service cut for like 15 years until Amtrak reinstated an overnight service of its Maple Leaf with the Niagara Rainbow name, but that only lasted about a year, which basically meant that the Niagara Rainbow had pretty much a silent death, and left the rails without a trace. The train service remains a nostalgic memory for many who traveled on it during its brief existence. I hope you all enjoyed this forgotten railway story. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you want, and have a great day. Thank you all for watching. Peace.